Not every Hollywood legend got a glamorous farewell. Some were buried in Dracula capes. Others had their bodies stolen or locked away forever. These aren't just graves, they're final plot twists. From secret memorials to airborne ash scatterings, these burial stories are stranger than the scripts they once performed. Bela Lugosi, buried in his Dracula cape. Bela Lugosi didn't just play Dracula, he became him. And when he died in 1956, the boundary between actor and character blurred one final time. Lugosi's family made a bold choice. He would be buried wearing one of the original Dracula capes from the 1931 Universal classic that made him immortal. It wasn't his request, but they believed he would have wanted it that way. Whether they were right or not, the decision sealed his legacy in the most theatrical way possible. That cape wasn't just a prop, it was a piece of film history. Some biographers insisted it was a replica. Others, including Lugosi's son, swore it was the real thing. Either way, it was buried with him, vanishing forever beneath the California soil. The setting of his burial added another eerie layer. Lugosi was laid to rest in Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, a peaceful Catholic cemetery that seemed oddly fitting for a man who played one of cinema's most unholy creatures. But perhaps the strangest part was the crowd that gathered to say goodbye. Few Hollywood stars attended. Instead, hundreds of fans arrived wearing Dracula capes, silently watching as the original Count was lowered into the ground. For years, his grave was modest. Just a simple marker. It wasn't until the 1970s that fans raised funds for a more fitting monument. Today, his tombstone features a granite likeness and a quiet reminder of his unmatched legacy. Beneath that stone lies not just an actor, but the man who brought eternal life to the undead. Charlie Chaplin, the body that was stolen. Charlie Chaplin brought the world laughter, but his final chapter was anything but funny. After dying peacefully in Switzerland on Christmas Day, 1977, Chaplin was buried in a quiet cemetery near his home. But just 3 months later, something unimaginable happened. His grave was empty. The coffin? Gone. On the morning of March 2, 1978, cemetery workers arrived to a haunting sight. Chaplin's resting place had been dug up. No signs of chaos. No vandalism. Just a clean, professional-level theft. Authorities were stunned. Who would steal the body of a comedy legend? Soon, Chaplin's widow Una began receiving chilling phone calls. The thieves demanded $600,000 for the return of her husband's remains, roughly $2.5 million today. They provided photos as proof, threatening further desecration if she didn't pay. But Una didn't flinch. Instead, she worked closely with Swiss police to set a trap. They tapped her phones, monitored public phone booths, and launched a full-scale manhunt. Weeks passed with no breakthrough, until they finally traced the calls to two struggling mechanics, Roman Wardas and Gancho Ganov. The men were arrested, and Chaplin's coffin was found buried in a cornfield 10 miles from the original grave. On May 17, 1978, nearly 3 months after the theft, Chaplin was reburied. This time, with reinforced concrete to keep him in place. The ringleader, Wardas, later claimed he didn't mean harm. He just thought Chaplin's family was rich enough to pay. The court didn't agree. He got 4 years of hard labor. What remains today is a simple grave in a Swiss cemetery. But beneath it lies one of the strangest posthumous stories in entertainment history. Mae West, a mausoleum she never visited. Mae West was larger than life. Bold, provocative, and unapologetically glamorous, she built a persona that could command any room. But her final resting place? Surprisingly distant and shockingly understated. West died in 1980 at the age of 87, after decades of pushing boundaries in film, theater, and culture. And yet, her burial choice seemed entirely out of character. She had purchased a crypt in Brooklyn's Cypress Hills Abbey Mausoleum way back in the 1930s, decades before her death, and long before she permanently left New York for Hollywood. Strangely, she never once visited the site, even during her brief returns to the city. It was as if her burial plans were locked in time, forgotten by the woman herself. After her death, her body was flown 2,800 miles across the country to be interred in the crypt she had selected 50 years earlier. But the strangeness didn't stop there. The crypt bears only her name and dates, no famous quotes, no nod to her groundbreaking career, and certainly none of the bold personality that made her a cultural icon. It's just a plaque. Plain, quiet, and almost invisible compared to the legacy she left behind. Even her funeral was modest, a closed casket, no diamonds, no spectacle. Friends described it as her final contradiction, the ultimate showwoman choosing a quiet goodbye. To this day, fans visiting her grave are often stunned by how little it reflects the woman they thought they knew. No witty one-liners. No towering statues. Just silence. Rudolph Valentino, The Borrowed Crypt. Rudolph Valentino was the original Hollywood heartthrob, the silent screen's most irresistible icon. But when he died unexpectedly in 1926 at just 31 years old, his burial was anything but glamorous. His estate was in shambles, his finances mismanaged, and there was no money for a permanent resting place. So, in a twist as tragic as it was bizarre, Valentino was buried in a borrowed crypt. The temporary tomb belonged to his friend, screenwriter June Mathis, who offered up her family's vault at Hollywood Memorial Park. It was supposed to be a short-term solution, but it never changed. When Mathis herself died unexpectedly the next year, her family moved Valentino's casket to a nearby crypt to make space. And just like that, the great lover of the silent era became a permanent guest in someone else's tomb. But the mystery didn't end with the real estate. On the first anniversary of his death, a veiled woman in black appeared at his grave, placing a single red rose. She came back every year. No one knew who she was. Over time, multiple women took on the role, some seeking attention, others sincerely mourning a man they never met. The woman in black became legend. Meanwhile, fans donated money to build a massive memorial in his honor. But the funds mysteriously disappeared, and the grand mausoleum was never built. Today, his grave remains modest, yet it draws thousands every August 23rd. Unfinished, unclaimed, and still adored. Steve McQueen, ashes scattered from a plane. Steve McQueen was the king of cool, a Hollywood rebel who lived fast and refused to play by anyone's rules. So when he died in 1980 from cancer, it made sense that his final resting place wouldn't be a neatly manicured cemetery. He wanted no statues, no tourist attraction, no headstone for fans to crowd around. Instead, his goodbye was as unconventional and untamed as the man himself. McQueen was cremated the day after his death. But instead of being placed in a fancy urn or interred alongside other stars, his ashes were taken to the skies. His close friend, stunt pilot Sammy Mason, carried them in a vintage World War II biplane, the same kind of aircraft McQueen loved. And off the coast of Santa Paula, California, Mason opened the hatch mid-flight and let the ashes scatter into the wind over the Pacific Ocean. There was no marker, no formal service. Just clouds, waves, and silence. McQueen had always craved freedom. Now he had it, forever. Years later, fans began leaving notes and small items at the hangar where he kept his planes, unofficially turning it into a shrine. And in 2012, a small memorial plaque was placed near the airfield. It doesn't contain his remains. It simply reads, Steve McQueen. The spirit lives on. Some fans even recreate the flight path, renting planes to fly the same coastal route in tribute. There are no flowers to leave, no gravestone to polish. Just a moment of quiet, thousands of feet above ground. Jean Harlow, The Sealed Crypt. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, a dazzling star whose life burned bright and ended far too soon. She died in 1937 at just 26 years old, a shocking loss that left fans and the industry reeling. But it wasn't just her death that stunned the world. It was what happened afterward. Harlow's mother, known as Mama Jean, was fiercely protective. And when it came time to bury her daughter, she didn't hold back. She purchased an extravagant private chamber in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn in Glendale, California. Harlow's casket? A triple-sealed bronze sarcophagus, placed inside a solid marble crypt. That's 3 layers of separation from the outside world. But here's where things get strange. Mama Jean established a trust fund to keep fresh flowers inside the sealed room, forever. No one could enter. Not even family. Only a caretaker, allowed in briefly to replace the flowers. For decades, Harlow's resting place became one of the most inaccessible memorials in Hollywood. Even her headstone avoided fame. Instead of using her iconic stage name, it bore her birth name, Harlene Carpenter, and the haunting inscription, "Our Baby." No mention of the silver screen, no nod to the woman adored by millions. And when Mama Jean died, she was entombed beside her daughter, until Harlow's stepfather had her body quietly moved elsewhere, leaving Jean alone once again, behind locked marble walls. To this day, no living person has seen inside that room since 1937. It remains sealed, untouched, and eerily private. Jimmy Durante, buried with his first love. Jimmy Durante made the world laugh with his gravelly voice, oversized nose, and signature send-off, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are." For decades, he never explained what it meant. But after his death in 1980, the truth finally came out, and it led to one of the most quietly unusual burial stories in Hollywood. Durante's beloved first wife, Jean, died unexpectedly of heart failure in 1943. Heartbroken, he bought 2 adjacent burial plots at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California, vowing to be laid beside her one day. And despite remarrying years later, Durante never changed his plan. He and his second wife, Margie, were together for over 20 years. She cared for him through illness and stood by him to the end. Yet when Jimmy passed, he chose to be buried beside Jean, the woman he'd never stopped loving. Margie, still alive at the time, honored his wish, and was buried elsewhere years later. That famous phrase he whispered at the end of every performance? Mrs. Calabash was his private nickname for Jean, inspired by a day they spent together in Calabasas, California. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a message to his late wife, spoken night after night. His grave marker is modest. It doesn't mention his fame, his music, or his decades-long career. Just his name, dates, and the phrase, "the one and only." Beside him lies Jean. No mention of Margie. No trace of the second chapter of his life. A comedian known for laughter, remembered most for love and loss. Jayne Mansfield, the heart-shaped grave. Jayne Mansfield lived fast, loved attention, and left behind one of Hollywood's most unforgettable images. But her final resting place? It's not in Los Angeles, not near other stars, and not what you'd expect from a woman who spent her life in the spotlight. After her tragic car accident in 1967, at just 34 years old, Mansfield was buried in the small town of Penn Argyle, Pennsylvania, where she'd spent part of her childhood. And her grave? A giant, bright pink, heart-shaped monument. It's as bold and dramatic as Mansfield herself. Her stone bears her real name, Vera Jane Palmer, and the inscription, "We live to love you more each day." But what surrounds it is just as strange. Visitors have reported smelling her perfume near the grave, even in the dead of winter. Some say they've seen a blonde figure moving through the cemetery. Paranormal investigators added her resting place to their lists of active locations years ago. And then there are the conspiracy theories. Some fans believe her body isn't even in that grave, that she was secretly buried in Hollywood. Despite family members publicly debunking these claims, the rumors persist. Meanwhile, the highway in Louisiana where she died has become its own unofficial shrine. Flowers, notes, and lipstick-stained photos still appear along the roadside. Jayne Mansfield may not have a Hollywood gravestone, But that pink heart draws fans from all over the world. It stands out, just like she did in life, among rows of ordinary stones. John Barrymore, the borrowed body. John Barrymore was Hollywood royalty, the great profile of the stage and screen, known for his Shakespearean gravitas and legendary drinking. But his final curtain call? It's still debated today, thanks to one of the strangest stories ever whispered through Tinseltown. Barrymore died in 1942 after years of hard living. Plans were made to bury him in the family plot in Philadelphia. But according to Hollywood lore, his friends, Errol Flynn, W.C. Fields, and director Raoul Walsh, had one last prank in mind. The tale goes that Walsh bribed a morgue attendant, borrowed Barrymore's body, and brought it to Flynn's house. There, they allegedly propped him in a chair for one final poker night. Whether it actually happened or not is still a matter of debate. Flynn's autobiography hinted at something similar, though with far fewer details. Still, the legend stuck and grew. Over the years, it inspired books, films, and even a scene in Blake Edwards' S.O.B. that turned the rumor into a full-blown cinematic moment. But the twists didn't end there. Though he was buried in Philadelphia as planned, Barrymore's son, John Drew Barrymore, later had the body moved to Mount Vernon Cemetery in 1980, believing the new location was more fitting. Some even claimed his body had been cremated after the prank and the grave was symbolic, until documentation finally confirmed he was, in fact, buried intact. Today, his monument at Mount Vernon is grand, noble, and silent. But beneath the stone lies the subject of one of Hollywood's most macabre legends. Marlene Dietrich, the divided grave. Marlene Dietrich was never just one thing. She was German by birth, American by choice, and a global icon by destiny. And in death, her final resting place reflected that same duality, a woman torn between two countries, two identities, and ultimately, two graves. When she passed away in Paris in 1992, a debate erupted almost immediately. She had famously rejected her German homeland during World War II, even becoming a U.S. citizen and entertaining Allied troops. Yet her daughter claimed Dietrich wanted to be buried in Berlin, the city of her birth. Whether that was true or not, her body was flown there, and she was quietly laid to rest in a small, relatively unknown cemetery, Städtischer Friedhof 3 in Schönberg. It wasn't the grand memorial many expected. Authorities feared a high-profile grave might attract neo-vandalism because of her anti-Nazi stance. So they placed her among family, discreet, hidden, nearly anonymous. But something strange happened in Paris. Fans, refusing to accept the loss, created an unofficial shrine outside her old apartment on Avenue Montaigne. Flowers, notes, candles. A second, spiritual grave emerged, one of devotion, not permission. Her actual gravestone is simple. Just her name, dates, and a German phrase, "Here I stand on the marker of my days." No mention of her career. No reference to her global fame. She rests in a country she once rejected, remembered in a city she quietly loved, divided even in death. A woman of the world, still caught between two. In Hollywood, the drama doesn't end when the credits roll. These stars left behind more than legacies. They left mysteries, contradictions, and burial stories stranger than fiction. From stolen coffins to sealed crypts and borrowed tombs, their final resting places reveal just how complex and human they really were. Fame may fade, but curiosity doesn't. These graves continue to attract fans, not for how these stars lived, but for how they were remembered or forgotten. Because in the end, even legends don't get to write their final scene. And sometimes, that's the most fascinating part of the story.